The youth pastor everyone respected was removed, and the whole congregation abandoned him until the truth came out. They led Pastor Noah out of Redemption Church in handcuffs at 11:23 a.m. on a Sunday morning, right between first and second service. I was in the parking lot helping set up the guest welcome tent when I saw 3 police cruisers pull up to the side entrance. Detective Raymond Oakes, who I recognized from the neighborhood watch meetings, walked Pastor Noah out with his hands cuffed behind his back. Noah's face was blank, shock draining all expression, and he didn't resist or say anything as they put him in the back of the patrol car. By the time they drove away, 43 people had their phones out recording. The video was on Facebook before I even made it back inside the building. The charge, according to the whispers that spread through the congregation faster than a California wildfire, was sexual misconduct with a minor, specifically with 15-year-old Autumn Castellano, the daughter of our head deacon. The accusation hit like a bomb because Pastor Noah had been working with our youth group for 8 years, had baptized half the teenagers in our church, had counseled kids through depression and family crisis and identity struggles. He was 34 years old, married to Rachel for 6 years, had twin daughters who were 3. He'd built the youth ministry from 12 awkward kids meeting in a basement to over 100 teenagers who actually wanted to come to church. And now he was being arrested for the one thing that would destroy everything he'd built. I'd been attending Redemption Church for 11 years, since I moved to Sacramento after college. The church was mid-sized, about 500 regular attendees, racially diverse, focused on community outreach and youth development. Pastor Noah had started as a volunteer youth leader when I first arrived, running Wednesday night Bible studies out of enthusiasm and a genuine love for teenagers. He'd gotten ordained 3 years later and been hired as the full-time youth pastor, a role he'd grown into naturally. Kids loved him because he didn't talk down to them, didn't pretend to have all the answers, admitted when he struggled with doubt or anxiety or the same questions they had. Parents trusted him because he was transparent, kept appropriate boundaries, always had another adult present during counseling sessions, and sent detailed reports about youth activities. He'd built a youth ministry model that other churches studied and tried to replicate. He'd spoken at conferences about healthy youth leadership and trauma-informed ministry. He'd been the one who'd counseled my niece through suicidal ideation 2 years ago, probably saved her life. And now, he was sitting in a holding cell, accused of molesting a 15-year-old girl. The emergency elder meeting happened that afternoon. All 7 elders plus senior pastor Gregory Whitfield gathered in the conference room. I wasn't included, being just a volunteer, but I heard the outcome within an hour because the church secretary, Diane, told anyone who would listen. Pastor Noah was terminated immediately, effective before the arrest. They'd been notified by Detective Oakes 3 days prior that an investigation was underway, had met with him privately, and decided to remove Noah from all positions pending the outcome. The arrest simply confirmed their decision. By Sunday evening, the congregation had split into camps. The largest group, maybe 70% of people, believed the accusation immediately and completely. Autumn Castellano was a good girl, an honor student, involved in choir and student council, from a respected family. Why would she lie? Plus, they'd heard stories about youth pastors abusing positions of trust, had seen the news coverage of church scandals, had maybe always felt a little uncomfortable with how much time Noah spent with teenagers. The second group, maybe 20%, was uncertain, but leaning toward belief because the elders had acted so decisively. If the church leadership removed him, there must have been solid evidence. The remaining 10%, which included me, couldn't reconcile the accusation with the man we knew. Something felt wrong about the whole situation, but we couldn't articulate what without sounding like we were defending a child predator, which was social suicide. Rachel, Noah's wife, showed up to my house at 9 p.m. that night. She was holding both twins, 3-year-old Mara and Sienna, neither of them understanding why Mommy was crying or where Daddy was. Rachel's face was swollen from crying, her voice hoarse. "He didn't do it," she said when I opened the door. "I know everyone thinks I'm in denial, that I'm the naive wife who can't see what her husband really is. But Jeremy, I know my husband. This isn't him. This isn't possible." I let her in, got the girls settled with cartoons and snacks, and sat with Rachel while she fell apart. "The detective said they have text messages," Rachel told me, her hands shaking around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. "Between Noah and Autumn. Inappropriate messages. Explicit content. They said Noah was grooming her, that it had been going on for months. But Jeremy, Noah's phone is through the church account. Everything gets backed up to the church server. Everything. He knows that. Why would he send incriminating messages on a phone that's monitored?" That was the first detail that stuck with me. Noah wasn't stupid. He'd been meticulous about documentation and transparency, specifically to protect himself from accusations. Every youth event had multiple adult chaperones. Every counseling session happened in rooms with windows where anyone could see in. Every communication with students was supposed to go through parents or the youth group chat where other adults could see it. The idea that he'd suddenly start sending secret inappropriate messages to a student made no sense. "What did Noah say happened?" I asked. Rachel wiped her eyes. "He said Autumn came to him 3 weeks ago asking for counseling. She'd been dealing with depression, had been cutting herself, was afraid to tell her parents. Noah followed protocol. He involved Helen, the female youth counselor, made sure they were never alone, documented everything." Then Friday night, Autumn's parents found messages on her phone allegedly from Noah. Sexual messages, photos, grooming language. They called the police immediately. Noah says he never sent those messages, that someone else must have, but he can't prove it because his phone was confiscated as evidence. I stayed up most of that night, thinking through what I knew. Noah had been my friend for years. We'd gone to basketball games together, had barbecues, talked about theology and parenting and life. I'd seen him interact with kids at church events. There had never been anything inappropriate, never a moment that raised concerns, never a boundary crossed. But I also knew that predators were often the people you least suspected, that they built trust specifically to exploit it. So I had to consider the possibility that everything I thought I knew about Noah was wrong. Except the text messages didn't make sense. If Noah had been grooming Autumn, he would have used a phone that wasn't monitored. He would have been smarter about it. The sloppiness of the alleged crime didn't match the methodical way Noah approached everything else. By Monday morning, the news had spread beyond the church. Local media picked up the story. Youth pastor arrested for sexual misconduct. The articles included Noah's photo, our church's name, quotes from anonymous sources about how shocking and devastating this was. The comment sections filled with people calling for Noah's execution, sharing their own stories of church abuse, expressing rage at another trusted authority figure betraying children. Noah's attorney, a public defender named Thomas Grayson, who looked about 12 years old and completely overwhelmed, advised Noah to plead not guilty and stay silent. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Noah was released on bail that Rachel paid by emptying their savings account. But he couldn't go home because the house was a parsonage owned by the church, and they'd already changed the locks. And then the congregational meeting happened on Wednesday night. 340 people packed into the sanctuary to hear the elders explain what happened and what came next. Pastor Gregory stood at the pulpit and delivered a statement that had clearly been written by lawyers. We were made aware of serious allegations against Noah Fletcher. We cooperated fully with law enforcement. Noah has been terminated from all positions. We grieve this betrayal of trust and are committed to ensuring the safety of all children in our care. We will be implementing additional safeguards and training. We ask for your prayers for Autumn Castellano and her family during this difficult time. People applauded. Actually, applauded. I sat in the back row feeling sick to my stomach. When they opened the floor for questions, people lined up at the microphone to share their thoughts. I always felt uncomfortable with how much time Pastor Noah spent with the kids, one mother said. Looking back, there were red flags. The way he'd touch their shoulders, the way he'd give them rides home. I should have said something sooner. Except none of that had been inappropriate. Noah touched shoulders the way any youth leader would, encouraging and supportive. He gave kids rides home when parents were late picking them up, always with other students in the car, always documented. But now every normal interaction was being recast as sinister, every moment of pastoral care reinterpreted as grooming. We need to make sure there aren't other victims, Deacon Martin Castellano said, Autumn's father. He was a big man, mid-50s, with the kind of authoritative presence that made people listen. If Pastor Noah did this to my daughter, he probably did it to others. We need to encourage anyone who experienced inappropriate behavior to come forward. The witch hunt was starting. I could see it in real time. People were going to start remembering things that never happened, interpreting normal interactions through a lens of suspicion, creating a narrative that confirmed what they already believed. By the end of the meeting, a parents' committee had been formed to review all youth activities and interview every child who'd ever been in Noah's ministry. The church was hiring an independent investigator to look into Noah's conduct. They were removing Noah's photo from the website, scrubbing his name from publications, erasing 8 years of ministry like it had never existed. I drove to the extended stay hotel where Rachel and the girls were staying after the meeting. Found Rachel sitting on the bed surrounded by legal documents and bills she couldn't pay. Noah's salary had been their only income. She'd been a stay-at-home mom with the twins. They had no savings left after posting bail. Their health insurance was through the church and had been canceled. Their car was registered to the church and had been repossessed. Everything they owned was in 6 suitcases because they couldn't get back into the parsonage to retrieve their belongings. The church is acting like he's already been convicted, Rachel said. Her voice was flat, exhausted. They're not even waiting for the evidence. They're not even considering the possibility that he might be innocent. I spent the next 2 weeks digging into what I could find. Started by looking at the timeline. Autumn had come to Noah for counseling 3 weeks before the arrest. The alleged text messages started appearing on her phone 2 weeks before the arrest. So Noah had supposedly been grooming her for months, but the messages only showed up recently. That timing bothered me. If the grooming had been going on for months like the police claimed, where were the earlier messages? I also started paying attention to Autumn's family. Deacon Castellano had been increasingly vocal in elder meetings about disagreeing with Noah's ministry approach, particularly around LGBTQ inclusion and mental health advocacy. Noah had been pushing for the church to be more welcoming to LGBTQ teenagers, arguing that the church's traditional stance was driving kids away and contributing to high suicide rates. Deacon Castellano had opposed this strongly, calling it compromise with sin. They'd had multiple heated arguments in elder meetings that had gone nowhere because Pastor Gregory had supported Noah's approach. 3 months before the arrest, there had been a major confrontation. Noah had invited a transgender teenager to share their testimony during a youth service, talking about finding God's love despite rejection from their family. Deacon Castellano had walked out in protest and filed a formal complaint with the elders, demanding that Noah be disciplined for promoting gender ideology. The elders had sided with Noah, saying the testimony was appropriate and aligned with the church's mission of welcome and inclusion. Deacon Castellano had been furious. I mentioned this to Rachel, suggesting it might be relevant. She'd already thought of it. Noah wondered if this was retaliation, she said, but he can't say that publicly because it sounds like he's accusing a 15-year-old girl of lying to protect her father's reputation. It makes him look even worse. She was right. Suggesting that Autumn was making false accusations would get Noah crucified in the court of public opinion even faster. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was happening here. I contacted someone I knew from work, Melissa Park, who'd done digital forensics for the FBI for 14 years before going private. I explained the situation and asked if there was any way to verify whether text messages were legitimate or could be faked. Text messages can absolutely be faked, Melissa said. There are apps that let you create fake text conversations that look completely real, with accurate timestamps and contact information. If someone wanted to frame someone else, creating fake text messages would be relatively easy. The question is whether you can prove they're fake. How would you prove it? You'd need access to both phones, the carrier records, and ideally the cell tower data. You'd look for discrepancies between what the phone shows and what the carrier shows. If messages appear on one phone but not in the carrier records, they're fake. If the metadata doesn't match, they're fake. But you need a court order to get carrier records, and you need a forensics expert who knows what to look for. I called Thomas Grayson, Noah's public defender, and told him he needed to hire Melissa Park as a forensic expert. Thomas sounded skeptical. That's going to cost money the Fletchers don't have, and I'm not sure it's necessary. The prosecution has strong evidence. Our best bet might be pleading down to a lesser charge to avoid trial. He didn't do it, I said. And if those text messages are fake, you need to prove it before this goes to trial. Thomas sighed. Even if the messages are fake, proving it doesn't prove Noah is innocent. It just creates reasonable doubt. And juries are complicated with cases like this. They hear youth pastor accused of abusing a teenage girl. They've already made up their minds. I hung up, frustrated. Noah's own lawyer didn't fully believe in his innocence. I called Rachel and told her they needed a different attorney. She laughed bitterly. With what money? We're living in a hotel room eating ramen because it's all we can afford. I'm applying for food stamps. We can't hire a private attorney. So I did something that probably crossed several ethical lines. I reached out to Melissa Park and asked if she'd look at the case pro bono, explained the situation, the suspicious timing, the potential for false accusations. Melissa was quiet for a long moment. I'll do a preliminary review for free, she finally said. If I find something that suggests the messages are fake, I'll testify. But I need access to Autumn's phone, and that's going to require a court order. Thomas Grayson filed a motion for the defense to examine Autumn's phone with an independent forensic expert. The prosecution objected, arguing that the phone had already been examined by their expert, and there was no need for redundant analysis. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Greenwood with 31 years on the bench, granted the motion over the prosecution's objections. She ordered that Melissa Park be given supervised access to Autumn's phone for forensic examination. The examination happened on a Friday afternoon in a conference room at the courthouse with Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Shore present to supervise. Melissa spent 4 hours examining the phone, taking notes, and extracting data. When she finished, she asked to see the carrier records for both phones. Rebecca Shore pulled them out, confident they would support the prosecution's case. Melissa studied them for another hour. Then she asked a question that made Rebecca Shore's expression change. These messages on Autumn's phone are timestamped between 8 p.m. and midnight over a 3-week period. But according to the carrier records, Noah Fletcher's phone wasn't even active during most of those times. His phone shows no outgoing messages during these timestamps. How do you explain that discrepancy? Rebecca Shore tried to argue that perhaps the timestamps were off, that perhaps there was an error in the carrier records. Melissa shook her head. Carrier records don't lie. If a message is sent, it's logged. These messages don't exist in the carrier's database, which means they were never sent from Noah Fletcher's phone. They were created locally on Autumn Castellano's phone using a third-party application. Rebecca Shore asked for a recess to consult with her supervisor. The preliminary hearing, which was scheduled for Monday, was postponed while the prosecution reviewed the new evidence. Melissa Park prepared a formal report documenting her findings and submitted it to both the court and the defense. The report was damning, not to Noah, but to the investigation. The text messages that formed the basis of the entire case against Noah were fabricated using an app called TextFaker Pro. The messages had been created on Autumn's phone, backdated to appear as if they'd been sent over a period of weeks, and never actually transmitted through the cellular network. The photos that had allegedly been sent by Noah, explicit images that would have constituted distribution of pornography, didn't exist in Noah's phone history, weren't in his cloud storage, and showed no trace of ever being taken or sent by him. The metadata on the images showed they'd been taken on Autumn's phone, using the selfie camera and then assigned to a fake contact labeled as Noah's number. Every piece of digital evidence was fraudulent. The case collapsed within 72 hours. The district attorney held a press conference on Wednesday morning to announce that all charges against Noah Fletcher were being dropped immediately. The investigation had revealed that the accusations were false and that evidence had been fabricated. The DA apologized for the arrest and stated that they were now investigating who had created the false evidence and why. Noah walked out of the courthouse a free man, but the damage was already done. The church's response to the exoneration was muted at best. Pastor Gregory released a statement saying they were relieved to learn Noah was innocent and that they were evaluating next steps regarding his employment, which was church leadership speak for, "We're not rehiring him." The congregation's response was even worse. Some people apologized sheepishly, admitting they'd been quick to judge. Others doubled down, insisting that just because the text messages were fake didn't mean Noah was innocent, that maybe Autumn had made up the texts, but something inappropriate had still happened. The court of public opinion doesn't do well with exoneration. People had already decided Noah was guilty. They'd already told their friends and family about the predator youth pastor. They'd already incorporated the narrative into their worldview. Changing their minds would mean admitting they'd been wrong, that they'd participated in destroying an innocent man's life. Most people aren't strong enough to do that. What happened next, though, was the part that made me lose faith in institutional church entirely. Detective Raymond Oakes kept investigating. He'd been bothered by inconsistencies from the start, but had been overruled by his supervisor who wanted a quick arrest on a high-profile case. With the charges dropped, Oakes had the freedom to dig deeper. He started by interviewing Autumn Castellano again, this time without her parents present, and with a child psychologist named Dr. Vivian Cross, who specialized in adolescent trauma and false memory. The interview happened over 2 sessions, recorded and documented according to protocol. In the first session, Autumn maintained that everything she'd said was true, that the messages were real, that Noah had abused her. But Dr. Cross noticed inconsistencies in Autumn's story, moments where she contradicted herself or couldn't recall specific details that should have been vivid if the abuse had actually occurred. In the second session, Dr. Cross used a technique called cognitive interviewing, asking Autumn to describe events in reverse chronological order and from different perspectives. Under this technique, false narratives typically fall apart because the person can't maintain consistency without rehearsing. Autumn's narrative collapsed. She started crying and admitted that nothing had actually happened with Noah. She'd created the fake text messages herself using an app she'd found online. She'd taken the photos herself and attributed them to Noah. She'd fabricated the entire accusation because her father had told her to. That confession changed everything. Detective Oakes brought in Deacon Martin Castellano for questioning. Confronted with his daughter's confession, Deacon Castellano initially denied any involvement, claimed Autumn had acted alone, that he'd had no idea the messages were fake, that he'd been a victim of his daughter's deception, just like everyone else. But Oakes had already pulled Deacon Castellano's phone records. He'd pulled the family's computer history, and he'd found evidence that Deacon Castellano had researched false accusations, had downloaded TextFaker Pro to his own phone 3 weeks before the first fake messages appeared on Autumn's phone, and had sent texts to Autumn with specific instructions on what to say and when to report the abuse. Deacon Martin Castellano was arrested on Friday morning at his workplace, charged with conspiracy to make a false report, obstruction of justice, and filing a false police report. Each charge carried significant prison time. His bail was set at $50,000, which he posted within hours using his home as collateral. The arrest made local news, though not with the same fanfare as Noah's arrest had generated. The headlines were more sympathetic to Deacon Castellano, framing him as a concerned father who'd gone too far trying to protect his daughter from what he believed was a dangerous situation. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic analysis of his phone showed he'd orchestrated the entire scheme. He'd convinced Autumn that Noah was dangerous, that Noah's support of LGBTQ inclusion was evil, that falsely accusing Noah was justified because it would protect other children from his corrupting influence. He'd coached her on what to say, helped her create the fake evidence, and then reported the abuse to police knowing it was all fabricated. It was premeditated, calculated revenge disguised as parental protection. The church held another emergency congregational meeting. This time, attendance was sparse. Maybe 150 people showed up, less than half of what had come to the first meeting. Pastor Gregory stood at the pulpit, looking exhausted, and announced that Deacon Castellano had been removed from all leadership positions and was no longer welcome at Redemption Church. He offered a formal apology to Noah and Rachel Fletcher for the church's failure to support them. He invited Noah to return to his position as youth pastor if he was willing. Noah attended that meeting. I'd driven him and Rachel there, the twins staying with Rachel's mother for the evening. Noah stood in the back, listening to Pastor Gregory's apology, with an expression I couldn't read. When Pastor Gregory finished and asked if Noah wanted to say anything, Noah walked to the front. He stood at the pulpit and looked out at the sparse crowd, at the people who'd abandoned him, and spoke with a steady voice that carried across the sanctuary. I forgive this church for not believing me. I forgive every person who assumed I was guilty. I understand why you did. The accusation was serious, and you were trying to protect children. That's important. But I can't come back here. I can't work for a church that treated me like I was already convicted before any investigation happened. I can't lead a youth ministry where parents will always wonder if I'm a threat to their children. My reputation has been destroyed. My name has been associated with child abuse in every news article and social media post. Even with the exoneration, most people still think I'm guilty. They think I got off on a technicality. So no, I won't be returning as youth pastor. I won't be returning to this church at all. Rachel and I are moving to another state where people don't know our story. We're starting over. And I pray that you learn from this. I pray that the next time someone is accused of something terrible, you wait for evidence before destroying their life. He walked out. Rachel followed. I followed. Behind us, the congregation sat in stunned silence. In the parking lot, Noah broke down. He'd held it together for the speech, but now he was sobbing. 8 weeks of trauma and betrayal and loss pouring out. Rachel held him while he cried, and I stood there feeling helpless because there was nothing I could say that would make any of this better. The legal proceedings against Deacon Martin Castellano moved forward. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that Castellano had genuinely believed he was protecting his daughter from a dangerous person and had acted out of misguided love. The prosecution wasn't interested in deals. They wanted to send a message that false accusations of sexual abuse would be prosecuted to the fullest extent. The trial lasted 6 days. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The phone records, the search history, the text messages between Castellano and Autumn coaching her on what to say. Autumn's recorded confession that her father had orchestrated everything. The defense tried to argue that Castellano had been deceived by Autumn, that she'd manipulated him into believing Noah was actually dangerous. But the evidence showed Castellano had initiated the plan, had provided the tools, had instructed Autumn step by step. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Patricia Greenwood sentenced Deacon Martin Castellano to 5 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She also ordered him to pay restitution to Noah and Rachel Fletcher for legal fees and lost wages, a total of $127,000 that he'd never be able to pay. At sentencing, Judge Greenwood addressed Castellano directly. Mr. Castellano, you weaponized your daughter and the justice system to destroy an innocent man because you disagreed with his theology. You manufactured evidence of sexual abuse, one of the most serious crimes imaginable, and you did it with premeditation and malice. You destroyed Noah Fletcher's career, his reputation, his marriage, his mental health, and his faith in the church he served. You traumatized your own daughter by forcing her to participate in this conspiracy. You wasted law enforcement resources and damaged the credibility of actual abuse victims who will now face more skepticism when they come forward. Your actions were reprehensible and deserve significant punishment. Deacon Castellano served 4 years before being released on good behavior. By then, Noah and Rachel had moved to Oregon where Noah was working as a software developer, having left ministry entirely. They'd had another child, a son they named Jeremy after me, which made me cry when Rachel called to tell me. The twins were in 2nd grade. Rachel had gone back to school and was training to be a trauma counselor. They were healing, slowly, building a life that didn't involve church or ministry or the community that had betrayed them. Redemption Church never fully recovered from the scandal. Attendance dropped by more than half over the following year, as families left for other churches. The youth ministry collapsed entirely without Noah's leadership, going from 100 teenagers to fewer than 20. Pastor Gregory resigned after 2 years, burned out and disillusioned. The church eventually merged with another congregation and lost its identity as an independent body. The building was sold to a nonprofit. The community that had existed there for 30 years was gone. I stayed for about 8 months after Noah left, trying to help rebuild, trying to support the teenagers who remained and were confused and hurt by everything that had happened. But it became clear that the church didn't want to do the hard work of examining how they'd failed. They wanted to move on, to forget the whole ugly chapter, to not talk about how quickly they'd abandoned someone they claimed to love. Eventually, I left too. Started attending a small house church where accountability meant something, where people asked hard questions and didn't settle for easy answers. I kept in touch with Noah and Rachel, visited them in Oregon when I could, watched the twins grow up, watched Noah slowly heal from the trauma, though he still had panic attacks sometimes and couldn't be in large groups without getting anxious. Watched Rachel rebuild her trust in people after having her entire support system evaporate overnight. 3 years after the exoneration, Noah agreed to be interviewed for a documentary about false accusations in religious institutions. The documentary, produced by an independent filmmaker named Anthony Webb who specialized in justice reform, spent 40 minutes on Noah's case. It interviewed Detective Oakes, who admitted the initial investigation had been rushed and had failed to verify basic facts. It interviewed Melissa Park, who explained how easy it is to fabricate digital evidence if you know what you're doing. It interviewed Dr. Vivian Cross, who talked about the danger of coaching children to make false accusations and how it traumatizes them as much as actual abuse. And it interviewed Autumn Castellano, now 18, and estranged from her father. She spoke on camera about the pressure her father had put on her, how he'd convinced her that lying about Noah was righteous because it would protect the church from false teaching. She talked about the guilt she carried, knowing she'd destroyed an innocent man's life. She talked about the therapy she'd been in since the confession, trying to process her own trauma from being manipulated by her father. She apologized to Noah directly through the camera, crying as she spoke. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I'm so sorry for the lie I told and the pain I caused. I was 15, and I wanted my father to love me, and I didn't understand what I was doing. I know that doesn't excuse it. I know I hurt you in ways I can never repair, but I want you to know that I've lived every day since with the knowledge of what I did, and I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to make sure no one else gets hurt the way I hurt you." Noah watched the documentary alone first, then with Rachel. He called me afterward. "I don't know if I'll ever fully heal from this," he said, "but seeing Autumn take responsibility, seeing the system acknowledge how badly it failed, it helps. It doesn't fix things, but it helps." The documentary won several awards and sparked conversations about the rush to judgment in abuse accusations, the need for thorough investigations before arrests, and the lasting damage of false accusations even after exoneration. It didn't change Noah's life back to what it had been. That was impossible. But it gave him some measure of vindication, some acknowledgement that what happened to him mattered. The youth pastor everyone respected was removed, and the whole congregation abandoned him based on fabricated evidence and mob mentality. The truth did come out eventually, but by then, the damage was irreversible. Noah lost his career, his reputation, his community, and his faith in the institution he'd spent his adult life serving. Deacon Castellano went to prison, but that didn't give Noah back the years of trauma or heal the wounds of betrayal. The church that should have protected Noah destroyed him instead, choosing swift judgment over careful discernment, choosing the comfort of certainty over the discomfort of waiting for truth. Some stories have clear villains and heroes. This one just has broken people and broken systems, and the wreckage left behind when both fail simultaneously. 5 years after the arrest, I visited Noah and Rachel in Oregon. We sat on their back porch watching the kids play in the yard, the twins teaching their younger brother how to catch fireflies. Noah was different now, quieter, more careful with trust, carrying invisible scars that would never fully fade. But he was also here, present, alive, building a life that the false accusation had tried to destroy. "Do you still believe in God?" I asked him. It was the question I'd been afraid to ask for years. Noah watched his kids for a long moment before answering. "I believe in God. I'm just not sure I believe in the church anymore. The institution failed me. But that's not God's fault. That's people's fault. We built systems that prioritize image over truth, that value certainty over justice. We created churches where accusations are treated as convictions, and restoration is impossible once someone's reputation is damaged. That's not what Jesus would have wanted." He was right. The Jesus of the Gospels ate with sinners and defended the accused and told self-righteous religious leaders they were the real problem. Somewhere along the way, the church had forgotten that. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.